Hey, Yiska,
Hey.
is it time for Overwatch franchises to die?
Okay, that's that's right on the nose.
Yeah,
Um,
we're getting right into
so
it.
so there are many considerations in order to answer this question, right? So let's start from the beginning. When that idea came up, there were some folks that were skeptical of that idea. Okay. I would count myself towards that group. I also felt like that in an increasingly connected community, the idea of fixing something to a physical location is weird, right? Like, I feel like, especially as a European gamer, like, I don't know what it is like for you, but there's a lot of or rather European play that I see in those communities, right? So I'm
Yeah.
playing like from 16 years on, I'm playing with Swedes, I'm playing with, Portuguese folks, I'm playing with folks from Austria, I'm playing with folks, I don't know, like from wherever in Europe,
Sure.
right? Why only Europe? Because of ping ranges, really.
Yeah.
Right? Like, really the only reason, right? So in terms of the gamer audience, I felt like this was not really hitting the core, but you could argue maybe you didn't want to. Okay. So,
Yeah.
one of the big issues that esports has always faced is the monetization per capita in esports. Folks here spend so little money per capita in comparison to sports fans that folks wanted to find out a way to monetize or to get to provide value for the individual esports fan that they could apply their money or their recreational budget here in esports, right?
Yeah.
So one of those theories was, what if we look at the traditional sports model, find the local fans, and engage those? And I will say, you have to say at this point, the Overwatch League audience, as I perceive it, has taken that on, and I think it did bring new folks to esports that had never previously been interested in esports.
I was going to say, do you think that, because it's obviously based on that traditional sports model where you are tribal about where you come from, and if there's an esports team that's named after even a city that's in the country you live in, so London Spitfire with a team for English fans to kind of focus in on, the idea was that it would bring you in and kind of pull you into an esport that you might not necessarily have gone if they were all named after just random orgs. Do you think it had that impact at least initially? Because I came into Overwatch League maybe sort of like season 2 or 3, season 2. So I wasn't a fan when Spitfire actually won. And then obviously since then it's been fairly mixed. But I don't think Spitfire were like automatically the team I followed, even though I'm a big football fan, so I get the tribal element to it. I don't think that really pulled me into it, but initially at least, do you think it had that effect?
I think to some degree, but I think it's worth looking at how these effects work in esports at large. So the first thing that we have to say is, or what we can be skeptical of, is if the city-based model was ever going to accrue a critical mass as to cause the same effect. I think you could at least question the amount of likely Overwatch League fans within a respective market that one of these teams acquired, right? So it's not strictly only one city for most of these teams. They actually have a region that, all of their area is bound to.
For sure.
And some even share one. LA, Seoul, there's 2 teams there. But the underlying assumption of there being a sufficient amount of Overwatch fans specifically, maybe even hardcore gaming fans, to fill arenas and to bring about that tribal state is at least questionable.
Sure.
The tribal size of unit, of geographical unit, that really works the best, as we see, is either on a nation level. So, UK, Turkey, Germany, those entities against each other. So this is a German team, and we see this working pretty well at, let's say, CS events.
Yeah.
Where I was at IEM Copenhagen, the most cheered guy was the German coach, okay? Because, like, that makes sense. Nobody asked which city he was from, okay?
No, yeah.
Now the real juice for forever has been EU versus NA, okay? So on a continental level, on a regional level, right? So
Sure.
it is interesting to play, for instance, a game of North American Overwatch and see how much more, maybe not as much now, but the culture of playing Overwatch was very different once. Like, if I was going to go into a, I don't know, like Diamond game in North America, everyone was talking. That wasn't true in Europe.
No.
Okay, like, we hunkered down, and like, maybe if voice check came on, it's probably like something that you should probably not have said, right? Like, the likelihood of it having been some curse word is much higher than it being something constructive. While, especially early on in Overwatch, there was a lot of fun to be had in voice chat, especially on the North American region, right? And then these regional cultures that developed, that's interesting to see the rivalry of.
Yeah.
We see this at Worlds, right? Like, all these memes being like thrown around. NA near airport, right? Like, NA being incredibly free and whatnot, right? Like, all these things happening. That's the tribal unit that really always, and as far as I can remember, in international esports scenes, that always happened that way. Now, here's my defense of the initial system, because the Overwatch League system was built with scale in mind. I wonder how they think about it now, because I remember at the conceptual stage, there was a possibility for 2 more European franchises.
Right, yeah.
So I think it was Rogue and Fnatic that were in trying to also get a slot there. Those guys were pretty active in Overwatch prior to the Overwatch League as well. Had these guys gotten a slot, then you suddenly have 4 European franchises, right? With the Paris Eternal and the London Spitfire.
Yeah.
And that becomes a unit where maybe you put more focus on it. Maybe you have more events here, right? To this day, we still don't have a single Overwatch event on European soil. So, of course, you're not going to play to that audience. But with scale in mind, and when you wanted to have a truly global league, maybe eventually these subdivisions could have developed. They could have, like, had they found enough buyers and accrued critical mass with their viewership and everything, and maybe the expansion slots could have been even more than the 8 that we got. Even through COVID, I think we could have compartmentalized. Okay, those guys play the North American, but we could have had a European division as well going, right? Had, let's say, with 6 teams, you can probably start talking about that. And then you could have had the Chinese division. You could have had 3 regions. And famously, like, even in this season, I asked every coach this, there is some inter-regional shit talk happening every time, right? Like, NA is such a wasteful season. Like, we had such a trash like region just this year, and then of course in previous years, APAC felt like they were superior because they had the better players, and there was always this inter-regional rivalry where I felt like that would have been the tribal unit that makes it interesting. The only other tribal rivalry that I ever thought of, really, to me, was the Battle of Texas. That was a little bit more special. I didn't feel it for the Soul Bowl. I didn't feel it for the LA teams, mostly because Immortals, or rather LA Valiant, bowed out of being competitive after like season 3, right? So that was always boring. Was a little bit more exciting in season 1, I would say. So conceptually interesting, but realistically, we do not have that critical mass, and you could argue that an esport will have trouble accruing that critical mass on a city level. And if the Zuck gets his vision, we might not think of physical locations as important going forward in the future anyway, right? Like, maybe we are all in virtual stadiums then. And there is something to be said about getting to choose your tribe and your family wherever they are on the globe anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So like even scaling into the future, we don't have to be too creative in thinking that we will have live translations that connect people fairly soon. And you can have friendships all over the globe. You will have virtual spaces all over the globe. Fan clubs can develop around team identities and player personalities rather than physical locations necessarily. I think this is a little bit further away, especially for the folks that, keep in mind, if you're watching this, you probably like the city model, and that's something that you enjoy about professional sports, and that's why you stuck around with the Overwatch League.
Yeah.
We've been open-minded about the possibility of, flocking around values of an organization, right? We talk about like being committed to the ecosystem, having fair contracts. That's might be something that you are interested in, or their messaging, like how they interact on social media, right? That might be something interesting, or
just
maybe
how well they're doing,
right? Like their performance for sure, right? Like maybe you want to be just a fair weather fan and like me, and just want to like always or be interested in who's the best at the time. Like, you're interested in the craft, you're interested in the excellence.
Yeah.
Or you dig player personality and you really like what Sebi Olby brought to the league when he held Flower's hands, right? Like, or what someone did on stage, the Mayhem someone, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Personally, I'm really invested in Checkmate's career now after he gave us the dope sentence, "We will always be here, ready to play more games." That's an all-timer. Like, that one lives rent-free in my head, given this situation, okay? I think that's going to be very important during forward to figure out what do people actually love and love enough to get attached to, and where do they get spicy in opposition to where that thing stops, right?
Yeah. I think that's probably the most like damning indictment of that of the franchise system that you've just literally talked us through, in that like you said, the location didn't really matter in the end because there were so many other ways that people got involved, particularly in sort of like who liked esports anyway and weren't particularly enamored with the general sports, the traditional sports system. The location based element was never really a factor for them, so it arguably didn't make that much difference in the end. So yeah, it's a shame that went the way, but like with the current position we're in, since you mentioned it, and the league being kind of up in the air, would you ascribe to the idea that franchises have got the league in the position that it's in currently, and that potentially them going away with people potentially taking the money and running and franchises leaving, is that an opportunity for the league to, or at least Overwatch Esports, to grow a bit more?
Grow in terms of getting
newer teams,
and new ideas and new ways to market this and to talk about it. Yes, I think there's a high possibility of this becoming a lot more fruitful. I think the problem is, like, they did this in the APAC region. Those contenders teams they do not have the resources to build brands, right? Like to really bring out their character, like a team like Runaway did way back in the day, right? Like, it takes a special skill, and just offering it up to folks, yes, it might be like basically having an open sandbox is nice. You just got to have enough resources going around to allow these actors to also express themselves and find folks that dig this and become fans of this, right? So
potentially less money being thrown around by franchises, because they had to pay for their position in the league. If that element goes away and there's kind of more of a level playing field, then maybe more resources can be kind of distributed.
I feel like the allocation of capital is at least questionable if we used our money well, I would say. And to be fair, there are organizations that use it pretty well. But at the end of the day, a lot of folks went into, use the money in order to build products, and a lot of them had to be killed. But there's also a lot where people found out, wait, yeah, this works. This is monetizable. This is where we build sustainability. For instance, in the Overwatch League recently, Florida Mayhem said that they are profitable. Now, I think in large parts this also is predicated on the revenue share from the league. And there's no saying that the league will be able to provide a revenue share going forward, or whatever would slot into that revenue slot going forward. And if you could have that, I think my prediction is that player salaries will go down even more considerably under an open system until a business case is provided and folks get attached to it and can make a business case. So franchise models are rough, and generally speaking, I think that's my personal opinion. The copycatting of sports models does not fare well. The esports fan applies their dollars very differently.
Yeah.
It's much more personality focused. Like it's very possible that the average Overwatch League viewer has spent more on their favorite streamer than their favorite team. I think this league was exceptionally bad at playing into player personality. I actually saw some internal emails just saying like the game is more important than players, in essence, and that might be an interesting avenue to test. But at some point, you just gotta throw in the white flag and say, no, this first and foremost, and will forever be about players. Valorant is doing that pretty well. Like the bigger personalities pretty seamlessly transition into a new part of a career and stick around in the ecosystem, and that should be the thing forward, right?
Yeah.
So also the question of whether or not franchises should need to die is pretty complex, because at this point I feel like it's not a sunk cost fallacy to think these are brands now. Okay.
Yeah.
They are recognizable, and they are entities much like other esports teams 6 years in, where folks are interested in these brands for reasons outside of location. Okay. Because of their rich history and the memories that they've made and the values that they've shown to have. Were franchises a good idea in hindsight? Maybe. Was the price tag too high? Probably. Should they die right now? It depends.
Much like the Overwatch League's current situation, very much up in the air.
Very much. And from a conceptual stage, there is even something to be said about what if you open it up and actually we get this critical mass, and like what if teams were just able to declare, just like loop into completely other direction and say, okay, every European esports franchise can now just create an Overwatch League franchise or name.
Yeah.
Put it to a city, maybe get local grants based on that, and rebuild regional markets based on location. And it is an international stage, and they can compete regionally, and then they also compete or inter-regionally, and then also extra-regionally. Maybe there's something there, but the price tag and the amount of actors that we ended up getting, unfortunately, capsized the growth rather than facilitating it.
Yeah.
And I think I would have loved to see what would have happened if the factor had been 1 less 0 behind the million, and how that would have possibly transpired. I think there's also something to be said that Blizzard was reluctant to scale the league too quickly. But in hindsight, I think we would have gotten through COVID much better had we had 40 franchises, and we could have compartmentalized those regions separately, much more so, and also developed talent based on that. The academy programs were still around at that time. I think we'd probably have a much more healthy ecosystem at this point, but like that's really hindsight. And
Sure.
I think in that regard, it's definitely, there's also a question, do you have qualified partners to that volume in each market? That's also questionable. I wasn't a fan of the concept at the start, but now that we've made history, when someone tells me Soul Dynasty, I have some emotions towards that.
Yeah.
I do sense some values coming from that. I do remember our history, right? There is some attachment towards these brands. And to throw that completely away, we'll have to see how this develops and how they decide to act. And I think they know much more about Overwatch now than they did coming into the league. And they know much more what's reasonable to expect to pay, what's reasonable to put into production. And I hope it results in us getting to meet a little bit more in local places. There's, of course, the third-party tournament stuff on the table that we reported on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons to be excited, but there's also a lot of hurdles and a lot of lessons to learn, and there's also a lot of lessons to ignore, unfortunately. And I hope we get out of this being wiser than we were 6 years ago.
Can only hope. Sweet. Thanks, Iska. Well, yeah, as always, very much up in the air as to whether or not Overwatch League franchises should die. Let us know what you think down in the comments. And if there's any other questions that you want me to ask Yiska about and get his learned opinion on, then let us know down in the comments as well. Hashtag Ask Yiska. And yeah, we'll be back next time to discuss more of our musings around the Overwatch League and Overwatch Esports as it stands currently. But as always, Yiska, thank you. And yeah,
Thank you.
See you next time.